Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank me, Oficina, and giving me this opportunity to present, about my passion for the stamps from the Indian princely state of Jhalawar. Uh, this is, one of the few states which I collect for quite some time now. And I wanted to share some stories and tell you about the beautiful stamps from this state. And yeah, and so basically, the outline of this talk is to introduce you all to Indian states, only the states which issued stamps during the 1800s and early 1900s. And of course, talk about the Jhalawar state, stamps of Jhalawar, talk about some ongoing research, which I've been doing about the design, which you can see on these beautiful stamps and its evolution. I'm going to talk about my theory, on how these guys were printed, or what would have been, the sequences of events in printing these stamps. I'll also talk about, how did this local postal system work, because at that time, India was an imperial colony under the British rule. But there were states, who were freely using their own stamps. They were printing stamps. So how did this postal system work, within the British postal system? And I'm going to show you some interesting postal usages of these stamps of Jhalawar. Yeah, so this first slide, this basically shows, the early dense map of India, because there were many states at that time, and many princely states. Sorry for the small print, right? But there was something. So there are basically two groups of Indian states. One which is known as the Indian feudatory states, and Jhalawar was a feudatory state, because it was ruled by feudal lords or princes or kings uh, within those states. So as mentioned here, Indian feudatory states had no postal agreement with British India, right? So they issued their own stamps as well as postal stationery in some cases, and the postal validity of which was restricted within the borders of the state. So it was mostly used for local mail. And there are some exceptions, of two states, which are known as Cochin and Travancore, and stamps from each of these states were actually valid within each other's borders. A total of 39 Indian feudatory states issued postal stamps. And here's a list. I'm not going through the full list, but you can see that one of those states is the Jhalawar state, which I'm going to talk today about. So apart from these feudatory states, there were another group of states which were known as the Indian convention states, right? And these are the two terms, both the feudatory as well as convention states. It's actually widely used in the Stanley Gibbons catalog, to describe these states and the stamps. So the convention states had imperial post offices of India, which actually had postal conventions with 6 princely states of India, namely Chamba, Faridkot, Gwalior, Jind, Nabha, and Patiala. And based on this agreement, what they did was they could actually use British stamps and basically overprint the name of the state and use it, freely within the state, as well as, to send the mail outside the state, right? So that's the basic difference between these two states. And coming to Jhalawar, so here is the map of Rajasthan. That's where the state is. You can see that, it is in the extreme west border. It borders with Pakistan, as well as, the other states of India, Punjab, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, on the right-hand side, as you can see in the graph. And Jhalawar was a princely state in India during the British Raj. It was located in the southeastern historic Hadoti region of Rajputana. So you see that red box, or the red circle right here. So that's where the state lies, and you can see that it borders with another state which is known as Kota. So at some point, Jhalawar belonged to the Kota Jhalawar agency, and it actually got a little bit more freedom, to be called its own mini state within the state of Rajasthan, right? And they were printing stamps for a very short duration of time, right? And this I got from Wikipedia. All the rulers who ruled this state, starting from 1838 onwards. But you can see the red box again. I've basically highlighted two rulers. Maharaj Rana Zalim Singh II, as well as His Highness Maharaj Rana Sir Bhavani Singh, during whose reigns the stamps were printed, and will be, the subject for this talk. Yeah, and over the years, I've also acquired, some in items of like social philately. And you can see here, I have the original photograph of His Highness Maharaja Rana Singh Bhavani Singh, as well as, one of the Christmas greeting cards, what he used to send to his British friends. You can see it's dated 1924, and it says that to greet you once again with the good old wish, a happy Christmas and a bright new year from His Highness the Maharaja Rana of Jhalawar. Right. So you can see that, although these states were being what do you say, running on their own, they always had, some relations, or they paid taxes, to the imperial rule. So here you can see the description, that Jhalawar. So the other interesting fact is that Jhalawar issued only two stamps, right? So when I started to collect this state, I was like, okay, it's easy. They just issued two stamps, and how deep one can go into the philately of a state which only had two stamps at the end of the day, right? But then slowly I realized that, it's a very interesting state, despite the two stamps which were issued, because it has, a lot of things to do research on, and it has been a pretty neglected state for a while. There has been a lot of publications within the India Study Circle, of which I'm a part of, who have been researching Jhalawar, but, there's still a lot to learn from this state, right? So this is how the stamps were printed. So this is actually the first issue, which is known as had a value of 1 pice. And you can see in the bottom left, 1 pice was equal to quarter anna, which was 1/64th of a rupee at that time. And and these stamps were printed with a typograph printing method in strips of 12s, and the standard thing was to have a vertically laid paper, but there are examples which are scarce, where you actually find horizontal laid paper, in which these stamps are printed. And the printing was through a manual process from a die, which contained 12 impressions of the design as well, and actually was done on laid paper with screws on the either side. So if you look at this guy here on the left, and this green impression on the right. So these were actually the fastening screws, which actually held the die against the paper so that the design was transferred properly. Yeah, so this is, and I'll be talking about, different paper varieties, which I have also come across in these two stamps. And this was possibly because, the printing process had a supply, which was random initially, which actually got streamlined, as the stamps got, were being used pretty intensely within the state. So the first issue also comes in another shade, which is the blue-green shade. And you can see that, here the design is slightly crisp. And I'm going to talk about this a little more in the detail, during my talk. But the main message is that, I mean, that the first issue has been described, at least in the Stanley Gibbon catalogs, to have two shades. First is the yellow-green and the blue-green shade. And here is the second stamp of Jhalawar, which were, again printed in the same format in strips of 12. And you can still see the screw heads. So this is a sheet which was cut off from the left side. So you don't see the other screw here. But, I do have sheets which have both the screw impressions. Yeah, so that's the basic design. So if you see the design in detail for the first issue, so these stamps were 18 millimeter by 21 millimeter in size. And you can see in Hindi, it was written ek paisa, which means one paise in Hindi. And the same one paise in Persian was written in the bottom. And on the left-hand side, in Hindi, it was inscribed Raj Jhalawar, which means the kingdom of Jhalawar. And on the right-hand side, the same Raj Jhalawar was written in Persian. For the second stamp, which apparently, so instead of one paisa, they basically wrote Pao Ana, which means 1/4 of an anna in Hindi. And then same thing in Persian in the bottom. And then, in Hindi, Raj Jhalawar on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, Raj Jhalawar in Persian, right? And why I'm talking in detail, because you will see that this becomes important, when you try to see how the design evolved, right? And the early concept design actually differ, in this placement of wordings. Yeah, so over the years, I've seen that, that there are many different paper varieties, as well as, some interesting watermarks which are found on these Jhalawar stamps, which can be broadly divided into following sections, which is basically thin, medium, thick, or, off-white vertically laid paper, horizontally laid paper, which I spoke about. I also have some stamps, which were actually printed on Pellior paper. I think, they were like, initial trial impressions, as well as wove paper. And, I'll also show you some information on the different watermarks which are found in these stamps. Right. So here you will see, the most common, they are found on thin white vertically laid paper. So here are the three examples, the blue, green, the yellow, green for the first issue, as well as for the second issue. And once in a while, I do see, a medium toned vertically laid paper. It's definitely different from this thin laid paper, because you can see the thickness if you hold the stamps, and they are less translucent. And then here is an example of a stamp which is actually on a very thick toned vertically laid paper. So it's a very much thicker card-like paper, but it's still vertically laid when seen against the light. And I have a few examples of these in my collection. Here is an example of a stamp which is on a off-white vertically laid paper, right? This is still thin, but it's not as white as it should be, right? So one can argue that there might have been some toning because these stamps are like 100+ years old, but I still highlight this as different because I do feel that the paper quality is actually slightly different from the from the normal vertically toned stamps what I see, right? And I have a few examples of the horizontally laid paper, and even the Stanley Gibbons catalog, they mention that, I mean, these are not easy to come by, and when I did the math in whatever stamps I have, I can see that, I mean, these horizontally laid paper are roughly occurring at a frequency of about 1 in 13 stamps. And you can see both varieties, for the SG1 first issue as well as for the SG2 second issue. Yeah, for me, I think the most fascinating part, are these paleo paper, which you see here for both the first issue as well as the second issue. And I mean, I don't know if you have ever come across a stamp, which is actually printed on a very thin, almost transparent paper, and this is the paleo paper. And it's pretty fascinating to see that, I mean, these were printed and even used at some point of time. And I have basically one copy of each in my collection. And the other variety, which Stanley Gibbons actually has a note on the catalog is, and you can see the quote here, which says that the stamps formerly listed on wove paper are from sheets on laid paper with the laid lines almost invisible, right? But I don't fully agree to this, because you can actually see, against the light that it is definitely wove. You don't see any laid lines. There might have been some examples, where one can dispute that, these are essentially laid, but these are, like very dense weaving, which you can see in these stamps. So here are, two examples which I'm showing for each of the issues, which are known to be on wove paper. Yeah, and then over the years, I've also noted, different watermarks which are present in this paper, right? And you can see here that there is no consistency of the watermarks, right? So here I've tried to show you this, this SG1 stamp, which has this watermark, which I made a sketch of here. Hard to decipher what it is, but looks like some watermarks which might have been found in foolscap paper during the British rule in India, right? Because I mean, I think since this state was not a very opulent state, at least for printing stamps, because they were using crude, typographic ways of printing stamps, they were basically using the paper which was found out there in the common market. Here's another watermark which I see, which is known as a partial crown-like watermark, which will actually become prominent here again in the next case. So you actually see like a crown-like image here. Sometimes you actually have, partial letters from a word. So this means it could be Ahmad something something. And then, so you see HMED and then an S here. So these letters, and sometimes you have emblem-like watermarks. So this is a reconstructed part sheet which I have, where you can see, these crests. This is like a strip of 6 where you see very prominent, something known as guaranteed here, part of the word, some letters of guaranteed, as well as watermarks, which depicts some kind of a crest or an emblem. And here you again see like a elaborate watermark which resembles like a crest and some numbers. And in this case, this is for the second issue, where you see very clear letters like HAIK as well as 88, right? So I'm still trying to do my research here. I mean, I've acquired like many complete sheets of the second issue, and trying to see that, if I can align those sheets, to make a larger sheet, because you can see, they were definitely, cut off from a complete page, and made into strips, right? So what I still don't know is that, whether these strips were pre-cut, and then the stamp was printed on it, or the stamps were actually printed, on larger sheets and then they were cut. I mean, my guess is that, I think the strips were pre-cut, because they have, they just had, like a strip of 12 die, and they were basically printing one by one in strips of 12. Yeah, so the other interesting thing about this stamp, is actually the design, right? If you look at the design, what is it? So the Stanley Gibbons catalog, it identifies this design as a nymph, a dancing nymph, right? So there has been a long-standing debate on the design found on the stamp of Jhalawar. So in Stanley Gibbons, they say that, it is figure of an apsara, a ramba, a dancing nymph, um, of the Hindu paradise. And this was first described, in the philatelic record, which can be traced to an article in Le Timber Post in October 1887. And in the following month, another journal, The Philatelist, had an article, under the title, which was known as Jabrapathan, which was a misreading of Jhalrapatan, which is the capital of the city, uh, uh, of the state of Jhalawar. And in that article, the design was described as the object in center was stated to represent an apsara, or a dancing nymph of the paradise of India, and it appears to be a very roughly drawn dancing figure of some kind. Right? So I was never convinced that it was an apsara. And here you can see a picture from Wikipedia, from which was actually painted by one of the famous painters of 1800s India. His name is Raja Ravi Verma, where he basically describes, he paints Ramba, who was supposed to be stunningly beautiful, and here she's trying to, seduce a sage who's known as Shuka. And according to Wiki, that's what I mentioned, that that Ramba is supposed to have unrivaled beauty, and she is accomplished in the arts of dancing, music, uh, and beauty. So here, and there was another article in India Studies Circle, I believe it was in 2011, where there was an interview of His Highness uh, Maharani Shiv Kumari, the Rajmata, the Queen Mother of Kota, right? And if you remember, Jhalawar actually belonged to that Kota Jhalawar district, right? So she recalled that that the design is not, it does not depict Rambha, a nymph, but it actually depicts Garuda, which is also inspired by Hindu mythology. And here you see, a 1725 painting from the Punjab hills, again taken from Wikipedia, where it shows that Garuda was an um, eagle-like avatar of Lord Vishnu. And here you see he's actually carrying the Lord Vishnu on on his back, right? And he always holds a bow and arrow in either of his hands, right? And actually the Queen Mother mentioned that that this design was actually Garuda, right? And in this interview, and this interview is the only recorded proof that this design is Garuda, right? There has been no actual stamps or essays or proof which show that the design is actually Garuda. It's not a nymph, right? And so what I did was, I started to track, the official seals from the state. And here you see, so this is the Chief Minister of Office of Jhalawar State. It has the, its official crest. And if you look at this central shield here, it actually has a bird-like figure holding bow and arrow in each of its hands, and has a beak, which actually depicts Garuda, right? So the Queen Mother was right that, and here is, another seal, taken from this registered cover, which has the SG25 stamps, which we use locally. And this is just an enlarged version of his, of this crest design here. And you again see in the central seal, there is the same, the bird-like feature, Garud, which is being mentioned here, which has a bow and arrow in either of his hands. And then suddenly one day I found one essay, which you can see here. So this is actually a very early essay, and you can see it measures 17 millimeter by 22 millimeter. And if you remember, I had mentioned that this Hindi Raj Jhalawar used to be on the left-hand side, and the Persian Raj Jhalawar is on the right-hand side, in the original design. But in this essay, it's actually transposed. the other way around. So this is, I believe this to be a very unique example of this early concept design. And you can see very clearly here, that it actually has an arrow, as well as a bow, in either of his hands. And the best part is that it has a beak right here, right? So it is definitely Garud, which is that eagle-like avatar of Lord Vishnu. And then over the years, I also acquired another proof, which you see here. So this is so the first one is on a thin wove paper. But this guy is again on a thin wove paper, but you see that the design, is slightly more refined, right? Where you see features of actually the issued stamp right here, which says ek paisa on the top, in Hindi, in Persian, but the final lettering of Jhalawar in Hindi and Persian, it is still transposed. So you see Hindi on the right, and Persian on the left, but in the original design, I mean, the issued design, it's the other way around. So then I also, so my hypothesis is that, in the early impressions of the SG1 issue, one should be able to find this beak, right, which will show that in some ways that, that this is actually indeed Garuda, not Ramba, the dancing nymph, right? And that's, I've been looking at these stamps for a while now, and you can see here, in some stamps, here you see that horizontally laid strip, which I had shown earlier, it actually has a beak here and here, right? And the best part is that, that the blue-green shade, most of the times actually shows this beak, right? So you can see very clearly here, right? And when you look at the, the impact of the impression of the design, it looks best in the blue-green shade, and then, subsequently is a little more hazier in the yellow-green shades, right? And I'm going to talk about another theory, which I'm actually trying to develop for those, right? And I've also acquired a bunch of color trials. You can see here of these early design, where now it actually becomes more like the issued design, where you see the Hindi Raj Jhalawar on the left, and the Persian Raj Jhalawar on the right, right? And these are still smaller than the final design. So they are 17 millimeter by 22 millimeter. However, the issued is 18 by 21, right? And here are, some examples found in various colors, as well as the final color, which is the yellow-green color here. And I also have a color trial of the second issue, which is actually seen in red here. And then, so my theory is that, I mean, since you can see beaks in some stamps, but not in others, right? I mean, the crisp impression, which you see always in blue-green shade, but not on the yellow-green shade. So it looks like, that the crisp early impressions of the die always found in blue-green, which is actually listed in the Stanley Gibbon catalog as SG1A, was actually the first ink which was used to print, because you can see very clearly that the design impression is always sharp, right? And you can also see the beak once in a while in the stamps. But as time progressed, you can see that the design was even broken, or like super blurred by the end of the, by the end of the life of the die, right? But in reality, when you look at, surviving imperial combination covers, where you can actually see the date where it was used, so these blue-green stamps, always have, a later year of usage, right? So in terms of, having a valid proof, it actually negates the fact that, that these were printed first, and these were printed later, right? But if you look at the impression of the die, it makes total sense. Being a scientist, I mean, if you hit the die multiple times, it is going to wear out with time, right? And the impressions will become crappy. And that's what we see here, right? So that's still a research which I'm still trying to continue on my own. Okay, so jumping into, how did the local postal system work, right? So in 1860s, imperial post offices within the state were established, which handled post coming from outside, or going outside from the state. The Jhalawar native post office was actually established in 1876, with service within the sale. Um, I mean, the native state postal system headquarters offices turned over mail onto the imperial post office, and then, the imperial post office sent it out of the state. It also received mail from the imperial post office for delivery within the Jhalawar, right? So any mail, inward mail onto the Jhalawar state from rest of India was routed to the imperial post office within the state. If delivery was within a local post office in the state, then the Jhalawar stamp was used for paying the fees for the local delivery. The stamps of Jhalawar were only used within the state for local post offices. Any outward mail from the local PO had both the Jhalawar stamp as well as the imperial stamps, as the item was mailed from a local post and carried to imperial post office for the outward dispatch. When proper local postage was not paid, then there was a special postage due seal which was applied. Um, Local postage rate was established based on weight, and double rates were paid off for heavy mail. Registered covers are also known to exist, but they're pretty scarce. And I'll just try to show you some examples of each, right? And this is an example of an early registered cover sent from Jhalawar by the Indian Imperial Post Office to Dewar. You can see it says June 18, 1871, and you see all the different stamps, which, and you can see this Jhalrapatan, which was the capital of the Jhalawar state. And with time, there was a new mark, which is the number 175 within the Imperial Postal Circle, was assigned to Jhalawar, and you can see this cancel here, in a early 1850s Queen Victoria stamp. And then even with time, the imperial system assigned the letter J to Jhalawar, which you can see the cancel here. And then finally, there was also an interesting squared circular cancellation of Jhalrapatan, which was also issued, which you see examples here on these imperial Queen Victoria stamps. There also exists, a two-page document, and this is, a positive from the original legative, which was once owned by Mr. David Pagam, who was an avid India state collector. And this document actually has strips of 5 SG2 issue, which have been canceled, with the different seals from the different post offices, which were found within the state. So it's, helpful for, students like us to identify, which cancel belong to which city, so on and so forth. Yeah, so here I'm showing you, various city cancellations, and, with various seals, as well as, highlighting one cancel in red. I've seen, only 3 different stamps, actually 2 covers and 1 stamp, which has this, hand-struck obliterator in red or magenta color, right? So these are very hard to come by. And there's this guy, special cancel, which is actually a triangular cancel, which was believed to be a bogus forgery, in the initial years, and there have been, research papers written that, it was this cancel is a bogus forgery. But I recently came across a cover, where you can clearly see that, that the Jhalawar stamp, was actually canceled by a triangular cancel. So, so these finds are still exciting, and, keeps you interested in a state which only published two stamps. And here you see, and SG1 issues on cover, which are pretty hard to come by. I believe maybe like 20, 30 covers might exist. I mean, less than 50, certainly. And here you see one entire cover, beautifully canceled by the hand-struck obliterator from the head post office, and here you see another cover, which is, actually canceled by the Shahabad post office hand stamp, which again, you can identify because that two-page document exists. Here you see more examples of these SG1 as well as SG2 issues used on postcard, imperial postcards, right? And you can see that, for some reason, I mean, both of these postcards were actually going outside the state. So they were going from Jhalawar to Bundi here, right here. So you see the Bundi cancel in both of these, right? So that's why, I mean, it is being used on an imperial postcard. So these are also pretty hard to come by, but always give you a lot of fascinating insight into the postal services. And here's an example of a double rate postage. So you can see that the envelope is pretty large. So it was, I mean, a lot of pages were sent inside. So it actually required double postage, and it was going to Jaipur, which is actually the capital of Rajasthan, of modern India. So that's why you see, it also has the Queen Victoria stamps on it, double postage, as well as double Jhalawar. And the most interesting part is that in Hindi it's actually written here, which says Mahsul Chukis Rahi, which means that, that postage was paid and it was not due, right? So you can see that at that time in 1887, there was no postage due seal, right? And it's actually true that that actually the earliest cover, which actually shows a postage due seal, is actually from 1895, right? And prior to that, I think the postmasters used to write with their hand saying that, hey, the local post was paid. And, I mean, I don't have a picture because of an SG1 double rate cover, but I actually have a pair of SG1 which is used, which might have come from a double rate cover. Yeah, so since talking about postage due, canceled, so you can see this rectangular obliterator here. There are two kinds of this rectangular obliterator, which you can see here and here, which was used, to indicate that, whenever you got mail, which was actually delivered within Jhalawar. So you can see that this was actually coming from Neemuch to Jhalawar. But then, they didn't stick, the Jhalawar stamp on it. So it actually has this postage due sale, and this due postage was collected from the receiver at that time. Sorry, yeah, and then in some cases you also see the imperial postage due. So this is the reverse, where actually this letter was mailed from Jhalawar, and it was going to, I believe, Jaipur. Again, right, but they didn't stick any imperial stamp on it. So it says postage due 1 anna, and again, the Jaipur receiver had to pay that 1 anna to collect this. And here is, a freak where actually the postage was paid, both imperial, as well as local, but accidentally, this seal was implied, which was later struck off, which says postage due 1 anna. So a lot of interesting stuff. I mean, sometimes you also find this too late cancel, where mail was, super delayed outside the state, and, in these combination covers. So this is, again, having the second issue as well as the imperial envelope here. Yeah, so in some cases, maybe the local post office didn't have the stamps, right? But if that one pice or that 1/4 anna was paid, they actually applied the hand-struck obliterator onto the card, which suggests that it was paid within the state, right? And despite no stamp being there, the local pay, the local fees was paid for these stamps, right? So these are also another interesting facts which you can collect here. So this is the postage paid seal, and sometimes, very rarely, you find them in like magenta color, which you see here. Oh yeah, and one of the exciting thing is to come across high weight or registered covers, which are super rare. Here you see for the yellow green shade, a registered cover for the SG1 issue, the blue green shade, a registered cover, as well as for the second SG2 issues, registered covers, which were used to carry important mail within the state. And the hunt for new discoveries is still ongoing. There was an auction recently, and I saw this cover, which is a new find, because if you remember, I had mentioned that the state issued stamps between 1887 to 1900. After 1900, they didn't make their own stamps. They were just using the imperial postage. But you can see that this cover is actually dated 1886, which means that, the first stamp was printed a year before of what is recorded. So, because it has an SG1 stamp right here. And then, as I mentioned, the mail was stopped in 1900. So this cover is probably one of the last are a bunch of last mails which used it, because you can see that the both the departure as well as the acceptance is dated 14th April 1900 and received at Jaipur on 17th April 1900. And after 1900, you find these imperial covers with the British India stamps, which were used in Jhalawar. This is an example of a Queen Victoria 1903, as well as a later Edward VII 1911 letters which originated from Jhalawar. And that's all. I think I'm at time, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Vivek. Very, very interesting.
Thanks.
Fascinating, actually.
Thank you.
We may have some questions. I don't know if
Sure.
anyone has some questions. I have quite a few.
Okay.
But let me start with the first one. The postage due, that was definitely, you need to know the language, because if you are a collector who doesn't know it, you can go like any other inscription there.
Yeah.
You mentioned there are seals, which after that handwritten note, whatever the year was, what was the protocol? So when a cover was found to be postage due, the regulation asked them to pay just the missing portion of postage, or they have to pay double, triple? What was the regulation? And if it's like a state regulation or imperial, how did that work?
Yeah. So both ways, right? So if you maybe I ran through those two examples, right? So the thing is that these stamps were valid only within the state, right? So it means any mail, like for example, any mail which is coming from Jaipur to Jhalawar from outside, right?
Has to pay that one.
Yeah, so it will have the imperial postage on it,
right?
But as soon as it enters Jhalawar and needs to go to a smaller post office within the state, not in the capital, if it needs to go to like, other places like Panch Pahar, or some other place, then, you need to apply that local mail. And then it will go within the state, right? So if you don't do that, then you get that postage due cancel on it, right? And in some cases, where I showed you example, if the local post office didn't have the stamp, they put that, the cancel seal,
Right.
showed that, oh yeah, postage was paid despite, no stamp being on it, right? And vice versa, right? So if a smaller post office is actually trying to send a mail outside of Jhalawar, right? Again, if small places like Barod, if one person wants to send the mail, so they go to the local post office, so they put, the local mail, then it goes to the head office, where they put the imperial mail, and then it goes out to
Yes.
Jaipur, right? Yeah. So if either of those are missing, then you get those cancels, postage due from the imperial side or from the state side.
Got it. Thank you. So, okay, so thanks for that clarification. So it's more like the inbound fee or the missing portion of the component.
Yeah.
That's interesting, very fascinating. Alfonso.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Vivek. It's a lot of info to absorb in 1 hour, but thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
As I understood, one PC is like a coin, 4 PC is an anna, and 64 PC is a rupee. That's
Yes. Roughly. Yeah.
okay. And why the rupee is divided by 64 and not by 100 as in the Occidental countries?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, so yeah, so initially, this division by four was the standard, which was in India, right? And even when India was a British colony, it was still applied. Like all the rupees and the annas and the pice, what we find from the British India, they still have this, this division by four, right? But only when India became independent, they started using the 100, divide by 100 approach, which was after 1947. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that's what happened. I think after India got its independence, it thought that, oh, you know what, let's use the modern system and divide everything by 100, right? So one paisa was 1/100th of a rupee, in independent India, right? But earlier it was 1/64 of a rupee. Yeah.
Okay. In the two stamps you show, the price is in letters. I think it's a letter, the correct name, but not in number. Why do not include number the stamp?
I don't know. I think that's a great point. I mean, however, if you see, other designs, from states, who were, slightly more opulent, who even use, like the British, printing services, like Waterloo Press, Perkins Bacon, to print the stamps. So they have numbers and words both, right? But I think most of the most of the designs which were like endemic, locally made, they generally had, the full word, not the number, right? And the other striking thing is that, most of the handwriting which you see in these imperial covers, it looks to be same, right? And so the reason being, education was not widespread in India at that time, right? And there used to be letter writers who used to write the letters for the common people, right? So that's why if you see the handwriting, or the addresses, or even letters, the messages which you see, it was basically written by a handful of letter writers who used to write the letters for the common people, right? And in exchange they used to get, either paid, or they had, like a barter system, where they get some grains and food, for writing letters as a service.
Okay, but in your presentation, I never saw a cover to send abroad like a Europe, and all are writing in
India.
Italy, to other states, but not to Europe or America. And how many PC do you need to send a letter to Europe?
Yeah, so I have never seen an example, at least from Jhalawar, but I've seen, if you remember, there were other states, the convention states, right? So there is one letter which I know of, is actually originated from Gwalior, which went to UK, you know, via airmail, right? So I think, it's because, I think within the state, there was not much of British presence. So that's why, there were no letters which were, going abroad. It was, only, people writing to their relatives and families, right? So it was within the state, but there are some letters which go, as far as Bombay, as far as Calcutta, which I have. So yeah, so there was, but it's still within the country. Yeah, not outside. I've not found any as of now.
Thank you so much. You
Yeah,
won the Sparga today.
thank you.
Jorge.
Vivek, thank you very much for a quite interesting presentation, about an area of the world probably most of us is unknown, okay? So I have several questions for you, if you may. What was the population of that place at that time, and how many languages were the official languages? Because you mentioned the stamps, several languages.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think, I think the population was, I don't, yeah, it's hard to have an estimate, because I don't, I didn't research that part very aggressively, but my guess is that, it would have been, I don't know, 30,000-40,000, I believe.
Okay.
Not more than that. Yeah, and that's just my guess. I think, and then at the same time, you saw that there were basically two main languages which
Yeah.
were spoken, right? That's why you have the Persian script, as well as the Hindi, which is known as the Devanagari script there, right? So I think those two were standard languages within the state. But I know that Rajasthan has many other dialects. India itself has close to 121 languages, all across the country. And in modern India, we still have 28 states as well as 8 union territories in India. So yeah, you can imagine, within 28 states, you have 121 languages which are spoken, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so my guess is that, although, the stamps are written in two languages, right? But, there are different other dialects, which were definitely spoken within the state. Even
Yes.
now, yeah.
And particularly for a small population like that, if you say 30-something thousand, 50,000, still is small. I was Google the population today, and it's less than 70,000, that area. But probably what you were talking about was larger area than today when
Yeah,
they
could
mentioned,
be. Yeah. I think, and this was definitely one of the business states. Most of Rajasthan has been a home for of business families. They
Mhm.
run various trades, right? So that and that has influenced the lifestyle, the needs of the state and the
Yeah,
people, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So I think these numbers are still like my guess. I think that I may be wrong or off by I don't know 100 magnitude or 10 magnitude, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Okay, some of the questions, if you may. Do you know the printer design relationship? Because uh, the stamps, they look um, very simple, very
Rudimentary.
what you say?
Rudimentary.
Rudimentary.
Yeah,
That's the
exactly.
word I was looking for.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
And I don't know if you're aware, but here, in Western countries, Indian state stamps are also known as, the uglies, because they don't look so beautiful, or like, not so polished. Yeah. So, that's the crude nature, because most of the states actually used to print these stamps, with local engravers, so they just basically, throw a design and they're like, hey, can you make something like this, right? So they used to engrave, in whatever, copper, zinc, sometimes
Yeah.
even on, wood, I believe, right? And then,
Hmm.
yeah, just print these stamps,
Yeah.
right? But there are, definite states, where, they were heavily influenced by the imperial rule, right? And so they basically published, printed their stamps in the UK,
Yeah.
and yeah, and those look super polished, like
Yeah.
Hyderabad, as well as uh, Jaipur, Indore, so if you look at, these states and the stamps, they are like, professionally done, all line engraved and
Mhm.
those kind of stuff, right? Yeah. But, I mean, but this, is one of the crudest design, right? But, it's still, yeah, I mean, it was used for like 13, 14 years
Yeah.
within the state, right? And that's why they exist. Yeah.
No, we don't.
Yeah, that takes me to the next question. The cancels, because the cancels, they are also that very rudimentary.
Yes.
And when I see them, and of course I didn't have enough time probably as you to analyze them, I cannot recognize them. How do you recognize them?
Yeah, it's because, first of all, because of that, that two-page document, which exists, right? And, if, I mean, I don't know how to read Persian, right? But there is actually Persian inscription which is written within the sample, right? And I didn't go into the detail, but there has been a bunch of papers, within the India Study Circle, where they basically, you can, read those each letters, and
Okay.
it basically says, Sadar Dak Khana Jhalawar, that's what it said. So which means, head post office Jhalawar.
Yeah.
That's the, I mean, literal translation. And, whenever the city name changes, it actually says that within the inscription, it might actually say like Dak Khana Jhalawar. So Dak Khana means post office in Hindi,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So yeah, so it basically says, the name of the place, then say that, it is a postal seal, right? And then says the name of the state. And in some cases, there's also like a year which is written in numeral, in Persian numeral,
Mhm.
which is like 84 or 89. Yeah.
I will pay more attention for sure, in the next time I'm in a show, to see Indian stamps or Indian
Yeah.
collections.
Thank you.
Two more
Yeah.
questions, please, if you may. You mentioned several times Stanley Gibbons, as a
Yeah.
reference. Uh, I know they are a general catalog. I didn't know they have a specific, and also for the British Empire, But
Mhm.
they are the only ones that they are very specific for India and states, or there are other catalogs.
No, yeah. So there is other, so even Scots, they list the Indian states. I know of maybe, the European catalog might also list. I don't have that idea, but, definitely Scott as well as Stanley Gibbons,
Yeah, but the Scott is very limited.
yeah, yeah,
I imagine Stanley Gibbons is more
more
has more
universal.
detail, multiverse
Exactly,
and detail.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
and, I mean,
And
I
Mike Mitchell from Germany, they don't care about these things actually.
no, but I mean, I think, uh, interestingly, I mean, there has been many strong European collectors, who have, formed amazing, stamps and material from the Indian states,
Yeah.
which is, and over the years, I think, whenever they show up, in like German auction houses or, Austrian auction houses or Swiss auction houses, I mean, we get a lot of traction, and
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they're there. I mean, I think
Yeah.
there has
We need
been.
to look for references and information on them. Okay, my last question. Sorry if I
No,
have
please.
too many questions. My last question is, you mentioned that the stamps, they are only for mail inside the state. Okay.
Yeah.
And I was trying to do an analogy. I'm from Mexico. Okay. And in the 19th century, we have a similar system, because we don't have the Universal Postal Union, and you need to pay when incoming mail to be delivered in Mexico. And we have a system that also for mail to send outside Mexico, we have something that was called Porte de Mar. That means postage for the sea, something like that, okay? So when the incoming mail was coming, they need to have a postage stamp, a Mexican postage stamp to be delivered inside Mexico. And on the other way around, it was the same, we need to pay the postage in that country that the mail was sent, okay? So who pays the postage in this case? Was the person or the courier that handed the piece into Mexico or outside Mexico. So the system we had was the Porte de Mar was because the captain of the ship that was sent the mail received the money to put the piece into the mail over there, so that's why they received these stamps. So my question is the following, because that was the system we had. Who paid, in your case, the postage? If you have incoming mail or outside mail?
Well, I think, I mean, the obvious thing is that that the sender paid, right?
But how was the money collected? That's an interesting question, actually.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that is interesting, right? I mean, in that, I mean, yeah, pre-UPU state, right? I mean, there was no, yeah, and I mean, I think at least, within the state, right? The money was collected by the local post offices,
Okay,
right?
that's
like,
clear.
For example, yeah. So, but, outside the state, I mean, you saw those covers, right? I mean, they always had double postage, right? So the imperial, post will collect because you are using their own, their envelope, like Queen Victoria envelopes or Edward, envelopes, right?
So
Yeah.
that means the postage office, they have two accounts, one for
Yes.
the local and one for the imperial. Okay.
Yes.
But there is the outside, similar to the Porte de Mar in our case. Okay.
Yeah.
What about the incoming mail? Who paid for that? Because you mentioned that they needed to
there
be
was a
stamped
stamp.
locally,
Yeah.
so who pays for
Yeah.
that stamps and how?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, I don't have an
Come on,
answer
you can
for
say, I don't
mean,
know,
my
we'll check.
my gut is that, yeah, my gut is that, that the receiver will pay.
Yes.
Oh,
right?
okay.
Right? Because, the letter is coming to somebody, who, and most of the people, who wrote letters, they had an important information to convey, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
I
they were
understand.
not just chit-chatting that, hey, I'm fine, and those kind of stuff, right? I mean, because these were like trade communities.
So that's why the postage was more common, perhaps, because
Yes.
incoming mail, you need to collect the postage due
Correct.
somehow,
Yes.
Okay, I
Oh,
understand.
yeah, and many time, because they were traders, right? So the traders used to carry the Jhalawar stamps with them, right? So, like, for example, if they are outside the state, say in Jaipur, right, and they're writing home, they used to affix those stamps on those
Oh,
covers, right?
okay.
Yeah. So, and they were not canceled by imperial. In some cases, I showed you one example which actually had the state stamp, also had an imperial cancel as well as the state cancel on it,
Oh, interesting.
which means that, they
They
were
got these stamps and they travel with the stamps outside
exactly,
the
yeah.
area.
It's
Okay.
basically like, if San Francisco had their own stamp, and, if I am in New Jersey, and I'm writing a letter to my wife here, I mean, I put my San Francisco stamp, as well as
Yes.
the US stamp, and then it goes straight away.
Yeah, I
That's
had
why
seen several
you find those.
pieces
Yeah,
like that. Yeah,
yeah,
that could
yeah.
be. That
That
could be.
could be one
Thank,
explanation.
yeah. Thank you
Yeah.
very much, Vivek, for
Thank
your
you. Yeah.
patience to my questions. I appreciate
No,
that.
it was great. Yeah. I'm glad you thought so much. It was exciting.
And if I may, before I pass it to Mauricio, on the comment of rudimentary, actually, that's the beauty of it. And especially when you see the marks of the screws in the end, there
Yeah.
Oh
is
yeah.
no other type of stamp that I know that is so honest to tell you this is locally made.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And when you talk about importance, to me, that is way more important than in any other developed country that has the whole infrastructure to bring something so beautiful,
Right.
because they were totally organic. Whatever they have, they develop it there and they put it to work.
Yeah.
There is a debate on importance, but if I were a judge at that level, I will go into a very heated argument to say this, to me, is more important in the way of how to develop from almost nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. No.
Yeah,
Great.
and that happens in many other places. But sometimes judging level importance is being seen more by demand and supply. But I won't get there. There's a difference.
Yeah.
Mauricio.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vivek, for this very interesting presentation. I have a few questions. The first one, are any quantities known printed from those two stamps, or is that still a mystery?
Good
Good luck.
Yeah, there's no census.
Okay.
Yeah.
You also show us how the printing became deteriorated over time. Do we know the material of the die? Was it metal or was it wooden?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I mean, I have not come across. I mean, but my gut is that, I think it was a metal. It was a
Mhm.
soft metal,
Mhm.
right? Because, I mean, you can imagine when you have two screws on both the
Yes.
sides, I mean, you can like, super
Yeah.
tighten the screws, right? And then, basically degrade the imprint of the die with time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you can imagine, I mean, since the first issue was only used for, I don't know, less than 10 years, I believe,
Mhm.
and then the second issue was issued, which went on. And these two stamps had a total life of like less than 17 years, 16, 17 years, right? So yeah, and within that span, I mean, it became like I showed you one example, where it was like, and
Unreadable, yeah.
and I think that, that the second issue was also made because the first issue could not be printed anymore,
Mhm.
it became that blotchy kind, Again, that is my hypothesis, right? Because, you can see those blotchy stamps, right?
Mhm.
When nothing is legible, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah.
The other question that I had, you show us that nice strip of 12
Mhm.
stamps. Were they made in strips of paper? The question is, was it a large piece of paper and was cut after the printing process, or was cut before and just printed in strips of 12?
Well, I don't have, proof, but my gut is that, they were printed in strips, so they were cut before.
Yeah.
So that's what I mentioned, I mean, I've been acquiring, at least SG2 sheets, which are, relatively okay.
Yeah.
And trying to match and see, if I can construct, like the full watermark of the sheet, right? But, as of now, it's still a, an ongoing quest.
Okay,
So,
perfect. And this next question just came due to Jorge's, one of his questions. So if I understand correctly, the Imperial Post Office and the local state post office, they were in the same place, or they were two separate offices?
good question. Yeah. So only for the capital, Jhalawar, they were at the same place.
Oh,
All the other, all, from that 2 page, all the seals which you
yeah.
saw,
Mm-hmm.
only the seal from Jhalawar had an imperial post office,
Yeah.
but all the other post offices were local. So you can imagine that, anybody who's writing from outside Jhalawar,
Mm-hmm.
that letter will first go to the imperial post office, like the local head post office of the state, then from there to the imperial post office within the state, and then go out. Right?
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
And finally, are there any forgeries known for each of
Yeah.
those two stamps?
Yeah, exactly. So those, those color trials which I showed you,
Mhm.
right? So they were, I mean, still some people believe that, they are forgeries, right? But if you remember, that's why I did my measurement,
Yeah.
right? So if you look at the size of the first two essays which I showed you,
Mhm.
where the letter was transposed,
Yeah.
so all those color trials, which most of the collectors, they said that these are forgeries.
Mhm.
They match the same size of the essay,
I see.
right? And then the issued stamp is slightly larger
Mhm.
than those, right? So
Yeah.
my theory is, at least these color trials are definitely not forgeries, but I do have examples, for both SG1 as well as SG2,
Mhm.
which are definite forgeries. And, my bad, I didn't, show it on a slide here. But there, when you look at those lines of the design,
Mhm.
it looks printed. You understand? So it's
Yeah.
not broken.
Yeah.
Right? So when you do a typographic transfer, there
Mhm.
will be always, some grains and specks of
Mhm.
the dye on the
Mhm.
paper, right? But yeah, they are on vertically laid paper, but they are like, printed. They are like complete lines, right?
I
So
see.
you can figure out.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So
Thank
always
you.
be suspicious of the pretty ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Great.
All right. Any other question or comment? Nothing there. Vivek, this was a fascinating.
Yes.
you.
You really enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Yeah. I really appreciate the time, and all the interesting questions. Yeah,
Yeah,
good.
we have a vocation of lawyers here. We are kind of inquisitive sometimes with questions.
That's great. That's great. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very
Y
much.
el día de mañana.